Welcome, Yorkshire Classic Cars Limited fans, and welcome to the Yorkshire Classic Cars Limited YouTube channel. You'll notice that this video has no sound, and I've recorded this sound afterwards. So here's me saying hello and introducing my video, and I've completely forgotten what I was saying, and I can't lip read. So there you go. I did say something about Dusty Bin and 321 on the telly, and basically the start of this video is me finishing off the bottom end of the Rover. So getting everything buckled up and installed, getting the front timing cover on, cleaned up and fitted, and things like the oil seals, stuff like that, and the Sump, that's an oil pan if you're in America. Here's the engine all covered up. I use a bin liner just to cover it over when it's in the workshop, just to stop any dust or dirt getting into it. And as you can see from the last video, I fitted the crankshaft, the connecting rod, big ends, and the main bearings. I've made sure it's all nice and free. Excuse me. What I'm showing you now is the big end bearings. These are in place, but they're just fitted together loosely. Obviously the new shells and everything are in there, the shell bearings. But I have got to torque those all up. Now, I can't remember the settings for the torque wrench. I know it's not a lot. I always do everything in pounds foot because that's just what I've always used and that's what I'm used to. It does usually say, if you look in your manual, it will tell you all your settings. If you're looking at Haynes, something like that, or your workshop manual. Now, I'm showing you now, I believe, the bolt. The bolt was in the end of the camshaft, and the camshaft that they supplied me had a metric thread in it, not an imperial thread, so the original bolt wouldn't fit. So what I did was I just put a tap through that just to make sure it was clean, and then I obtained a bolt. I have a massive box of nuts and bolts at home, and I got a 12.9 out of there, a 12.7 or a 14.9, I can't remember which it was, and I put that in there. And I've Loctited it in and tightened it FT, which is blooming tight, in case you don't know what FT stands for. Obviously I did the video timing, in the last video I did the camshaft timing, so that's all correct. And what I'm saying is I worked down each one of these. They're all oiled and everything, so they're all ready to rock and roll. But what I did is I worked down each one. Now, I will come in a sec. I think I've just nipped off to get my big Stilsons that I'm going to use on the end of the crankshaft just to turn the engine. Yeah, you can see them there. They're the big Stilsons that I use. And my torque wrench. The Stilsons, when I use those very carefully on the end of the crankshaft, I do it very lightly. Obviously, it turns very easily. There's no spark plugs in it. There's no cylinder heads on it. So there's no real resistance there, so it's not damaging the end of the crankshaft. If you were worried about damaging the end of the crank, you could just put some tape over the end of that. I know it won't. I just lock against the woodruff key that's in the end there, and I use that just to turn the engine. It doesn't do any damage. If it did, I wouldn't do it. It's that simple. So I use that to turn it so that each one of these is easy enough to get to, and I do a set at a time. So I do, I can't remember if I'm doing rod bolts first or if I'm doing main bearings first, but either way, it's irrelevant. The job is the same. Excuse me. So as you can see here, I'm just turning the engine clockwise as you view from the front. As you can see, just carefully lifting the Stilsons up to move the engine over. And this then allows me to do each one and check once I've torqued it. So it's getting me the first set of big ends up to where I need them. So here I am, I've set my torque wrench, obviously, to whatever foot-pounds I needed. I think it's 45, but don't quote me on that. And what I do is I actually go up in stages. So what I'll do is I'll run them up a little bit so that they're just nipped by hand, which you haven't seen me do. And then what I'll do is I usually do them to about sort of 30 and then to 45. Like when I do cylinder heads, I'll do them to about 40, 50, and then 55 or 60 or whatever they have to be. And I'm trying to do it as even as possible. Now, if you look at my right hand, I am covering the shot, unfortunately. But that's to stop the engine rotating. Now, I've sped the rest of it up because you don't want to just watch me do 8 sets, all exactly the same. But basically you work through each one and then I turn it to get to the next one. As I do that, I'm actually checking that the engine is still free, because if there's any issue in between times, now's the time to spot it. So now I'm just going to whip through the rest of them, and Bob's your uncle. So basically, here I am, just explaining that I've now torqued everything up. And the next thing to put on is the front timing cover. Now this covers all the gears. I've obviously cleaned it, as you can see here, it's all impeccably clean and ready to rock and roll. I've got to fit the front oil seal, as I'm showing. What I'm explaining is the original cover that came with the engine is the water pump was sea solid. So this was another one that I had in stock from another engine that I bought. And basically the water pump was free on this one. Now it does seem very free and the seals may be damaged in it, but I figured it was worth a try. If it turns out that it's buggered, I've still got to buy a new one. So, you know, one way or another, that's kind of, I'm quite happy for him to have that. Because, you know, there it is, basically. It just helps somebody out. Actually, I will say that when I removed that water pump, which I did later on when I fitted the engine, it's absolutely like brand new inside. So what I'm doing now basically is cleaning all the front end and cleaning the gasket surfaces and stuff like that. I can't actually remember what I'm talking you through there, but I think what I'm doing is discussing the oil feeds and things like that, which are very interesting actually. What you'll find is when these different pipes on the front here that I have my hands over the top of, those are oil feeds and things like that that come into the engine from the oil filter and out of the engine from the oil pump and blah 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 blah. Some go off to the big ends and the mains and stuff like that, and some go back to the oil filter, and it does all sorts of stuff. But obviously the pump, which is driven off the distributor and the end of the crankshaft, goes first through the oil filter, as you can see there. That's the oil filter that my little finger's pointing to, and then it pipes it back. The extraneous fittings there, they're all coming out. They were just in there. That's just how it was, and I just needed to remove those. But yeah, so what I'm going to show you in a sec, once I've discussed oil filter mountings and things like that, is I'm going to get a block of wood, which is a solid flat block, and some Abranet. Now I use Abranet for cleaning gasket surfaces purely because it doesn't leave grit and sand behind. And I'm just going to go over that and absolutely make sure it's perfectly clean and flat. Now, right, so here I am explaining the front oil seal basically. If you ever look at the cross section of a seal, as you look at it now, you can see there's a hollow side and a solid side, and the solid side always goes out. There's like a spring on the inside that you have to be careful not to displace. And the lip on it is a little bit like a barb, so that basically tries to prevent the oil pushing past it. Now what you do is you put that into the housing. I've cleaned all the housing. I've actually edited that part out, but you just clean it all out, make sure it's nice and smooth. And then what I do is with a little hammer, you can actually use a socket if you've got one large enough, but I didn't have one large enough for this seal because it's quite a large one. So what I'm doing is I'm working around the clock, but then going opposite. So I'll sort of give it a couple of taps, then go opposite, and then come back sort of another sort of 10-20 degrees, and I'm working way around it, so it's going in nice and squarely, and I push it in all the way to the base. Now you'll feel once it's hit the base, because obviously the little hammer taps will become more solid. So when it goes donk, you know, and you get more of a thud. Now what I'm explaining now, excuse me, I have actually got a cold, so I do apologise for that. You're listening to that. What I'm saying is sometimes what happens is the seal will cut a groove into the sealing surface on the crankshaft or other parts, obviously if it's a seal for a camshaft or something like that. And you can actually sometimes leave them out a little or in a little further to try and avoid that groove, because obviously that groove will then let oil to pass the lip of the oil seal, which makes life awkward, obviously. But that is a way of doing it. Obviously, if the groove becomes really bad, in such as the crankshaft or whatever, you can actually get them sleeved. Now what I'm pointing to now is a bung that somebody's put in the front, and what it's had previously is it's probably been on a race engine or something, this front cover, because it actually came off a guy who raced V8s. And basically what they used to do was from the oil pump put a direct feed through there to the base of the distributor shaft to oil. Right, so welcome back. If you got this far through the video, I apologise that I've had to talk over the video sections because the blooming mic won't work. It's really driving me insane, so I'm giving up on the mic for now. If you don't like it, I'm sorry, but I can't help it. That's it. You're going to have to take it or leave it, I'm afraid. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to clearance the bolt on the front of the engine there. So basically, I want to make sure this bolt here isn't going to catch on the front timing cover. So what I'm going to do is, without the gasket, which will of course add probably about 1 millimetre, I would imagine, I've just nipped out and asked one of the people at the yard, one of the good people up the yard, if they had a bit of blue tack, because I forgot to bring some, and it's great for getting the muck out your hands. So what I do with the blue tack, put it on the end of that nut there, I can get it to stick. Nothing more exotic than that. I think this is white tack. I don't care what colour my tack is, as long as it's good tack. I haven't blown this out with a compressor yet, but it's fine. I'm not going to damage anything. And then just using the dowels and the bolt, stud, sorry, it's not a bolt, it's a stud. Just going to line that up. Just ease that on. Be gentle there with it. Don't be too rough. Right, so make sure we're on the dowels. There we go. Lovely. Right, so it's almost square. Just going to ease that off. It's pretty tight as that. So what I'm going to actually have to do, I think... Well, no, it's not as tight as I thought. We'll just measure that. Bearing in mind I will have the gasket on top of this thickness, which is probably about another millimetre. I get that very loosely at 3.3 millimetres, which is about half an inch. 3.2 is that, eighth of an inch, sorry. So I think we're all right there, actually. I think that'll be fine. So with the extra thickness of the gasket, I reckon we'll be about another mil. Yeah, 3.56 I'm getting there. I'm trying not to crush it, but if I have crushed it at all, that will obviously give me more clearance. I'm sure that's fine. Absolutely fine. Right, so let me just blow this out with the airline. I'll turn you off while I do that, because obviously the compressor is very, very loud. And then we'll get to fitting it. So here we are, cleaned enough. Don't want to sand off all these raised edges for obvious reasons. I'm going to use some of this stuff. This is black gasket maker, so instant gasket basically. Now this stuff basically, I'm sure somebody out there will tell me I'm wrong, but basically it's just silicon. Silicon is silicon. There isn't anything special about it. There's high and low modulus, but other than that, it's just silicon. Excuse me, I'm just looking for a cloth. I hate silicon. I hate handling it. I hate using it. But this sort of thing, it's what people will be out there. And I watch Be a Plumber on Instagram, and he goes, "Oh, put some silicon there," and everybody goes, "Can't buy." People will be saying that about this. And you know what? They'll be driving a Mondeo or a Focus or an Audi or something like that will have their engine stuck together with this stuff, because this is what modern engine builders use. My Skyline from 1989 or 88 or whatever it was when it was designed, the RB in that, the sump was held on with this stuff. All sorts of things on that car were held together with this stuff. There's only a head gasket and an intake gasket, and that was pretty much it. Everything else was using silicon. Now, it works great as long as you don't trowel it on. I am very, very sparing with it, so I'll put a bit on like that. Try to keep it away from the edges. Okay, so that, if you left that bead there, once you pressed it down, that would splurge out both sides. Now into a waterway, it's not good practice, but it's not the end of the world. But what I do is just take a little bit like that and just smear it out. Now, I want some round these waterways a little thicker, purely because, if you recall, the front of the engine had some gouges out of it that obviously I don't want leaking. This is a bolt hole. These are oil holes. Now, these are particularly important. We don't want it around the oil holes at all if I can avoid it. The inner here, I'm going to put a smear on the inner there, and it is a very thin smear, purely because there is oil running in here, obviously. However, it is not under pressure. This is just splash fed in here. This is not under anything more than crankcase pressure, which, you know, on a newly built engine like this should be very minimal. You'll notice around the holes I'm very carefully removing it like that. He says this is why I need the cloth, and then just putting a smear up there, because when I compress this, I don't want the gasket to push that into those oil holes, because they could block them. It could block a filter, it could block an oil strainer hole. So I want a little around the edges there, but as far away as I can possibly get it. Now on this end, tiny little bit more on there. And that's that. So I'll do the rest of this. Just like that. So once I've done that, just place that down there out of shot. Once I've done that, what I like to do then, he says, desperately for a cloth. The old Yorkshire Classic Cars limited jumper there. Once I've done that, what I do in the finger then is just take the inner edge off, because I don't want it splurging out into here. Again, if this stuff breaks free, it'll end up in the engine. And if it blocks the oil pickup pipe, anything like that, that's very, very bad news. So we don't want it to squish out all over the place. And I'll just do that round there. Put my trouser leg, it's fine, that's what they're there for. And that's good. Just a tiny bit round there. Now, because this is splash fed, it does need very little sealing there. It's only really around these water jackets I'm concerned about. Normally I wouldn't put any on if it wasn't for that, quite honestly, on there. But because the surface is a little damaged. So now I'm going to line that up with these holes. I'm going to use the dowel holes and the bolt there as reference points. And I'm just going to bob that on there. So anyway, what I do is I leave that on now to set for a little while. And then if there are any points where it would splurge out, I can wipe those off afterwards like that, see? But once it's set a little bit like that, you get more of a cushion thickness through it, in my experience. So I will now let that set, and then what I'll do is I'll have a quick bite to eat for my dinner. It's about 3 o'clock, and then I'll come back, I'll put a smear of gasket sealer on the other side, and then whopper on the block. Obviously I've been off for a little bit, I managed to find a rag, which was a good thing. Now what I'm going to do is just follow this round like I did before, with a tiny smear of silicone. This is now just soft, it's still soft, but it's held. So looking at the front of the engine here, it's this one here that really needs a good thickish seam round, which is uncomfortably close to the oil galleries here. However, I'm just going to do it anyway, so I'm going to put a bit of a thicker smear around there, because that one is difficult, really, if I'm honest. This side was okay, and the rest of it's okay, so I'm going to build that up a little tiny bit thicker there, and I'm going to smear it around again like I did before. Right, so I've gone through there, put just a soft smear on around the edges there. Again, I tried to
sidestep round the oil holes here because I'm pretty sure it wouldn't need any there anywho. But of course you really don't want to block those. And then what I'm going to do is, with my rag, just go around the inside edge there again. Just pull off any excess. Now, you notice I'm not doing this around the outside. I don't care about the outside. If there's any splurge out there, A, it gives you an indication of how much splurge you've got on the inside. I don't think that's a technical term, splurge, by the way. It might be for some things, but I don't know if it is for this. But it's the inside I'm bothered about. The outside will just fall off if you leave a splodge of silicone on. So that's good. Happy with that. I've got the bolts ready, and this bolt here, just going to give that one a wipe, get the silicone off it. And I'm going to lead on the bolt that's there behind the oil pump that you just saw. You can't get that one out. Well, it's a screw, but just going to apply a tiny weeny little bit of copper slip on there. And then as I line it up on the engine, anywho, so what I'm going to do is, being very careful to hold this without splurging the silicone and so I don't damage the front oil seal there. I'm going to use the water pump as a guide over the crank and the woodruff key, hold it up in position and then start that screw on the top left. There is also a stud here, which I'll show you in a second. This is one of those delicate tasks that makes me look like an idiot. You know why that is? Because I am. But hey, I know it at least. So, you know, that makes me ahead of a lot of people I know. So, just don't run that in a few threads. It doesn't have to be all the way in. Then very careful with my mallet down here. Give it a tap over the studs, over the dowels, sorry. So it goes back nice and square like that. Oops, bob on, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to start another screw through this hole here, just to hold it in position. Okay, that isn't the screw for there, it's just a screw, just a bolt. But it's just going to hold it in place while I position all the others. And that'll bob that in there. Right. So that's a split locking washer on that one. The rest of them have these little sort of 5/16 washers, but they're very thick. They're about 1/8 of an inch thick. So that's just going to run that up gently. Obviously, like everything I do, I don't tighten it all. I just run everything in loose. The next bolts I'm going to put in are by length. These are the longest bolts that go through the timing cover and the water pump here, here and here. Okay, these are the long bolts. That one, that one, that one and that one. I'm hoping you can see what I'm pointing at. These have another one of the thick washers on them. Some of them have 2 on. And I'll no doubt find that out once I've made a mess getting these in. There's usually an aluminium piece that goes over it, so I don't know if one part screws into there and the other screws through there, and it usually has a longer bolt. This bolt I believe I broke when I took the front cover off, it sheared off, and I think that's where that one's gone. But I'll have a look because I may have another one somewhere. I have loads of Rover bits kicking about, but the that one's missing, and I've got a screw just to go in there. That's one I missed there. So I've got that here. Just bob that one in now as we speak. Right, so next step, obviously, is install the oil pickup pipe, which is essential. Obviously, if you don't know, the oil pickup pipe fits here, and that's the oil comes out of the sump. It sits in the sump. Obviously, the engine is the other way up. The oil sits over this, and it sucks it up into the oil pump and then distributes it to the appropriate parts of the engine. Now, there are a number of spacer washers. These can quite often differ. So if you're building a Rover and you've got different stuff, don't worry about that. It is what it is, sort of thing. What I'm going to do there is, obviously there's a gasket goes here. I've got the gasket somewhere. Oh, not too far, sorry. There's the gasket. That just goes on. Absolutely dry. No sealant on that at all. I've checked the gapping on the washers just off camera, and that's spot on as it is there. And then what I'm going to do is just check that when I rotate the engine here, it isn't going to catch on the crank webs there. Just as a matter of caution, really, because obviously it did, the noise would be unbelievable and the damage. So if I just hold that in place, in position, yeah, we're good there. Just go right around. Oops, famous last words. Just go right around. I'm just using I've just screwed in a flex plate stroke flywheel bolt that I'm using. Just going to move that around a few different. Oops, screwed it the wrong way, sorry. I think we're good actually, but I'll just the outer parts of the webs tend to be a little bit offset sometimes, so not always. It's just I just rather be safe than sorry, as I say. So yeah, there's a good 1/4 inch clearance there. That's absolutely cool in the gang. So stand her back up like that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to screw that down, and then I'm then going to check the clearance of the sump on that, because the sump, although I have actually painted it, it's been altered and modified and changed and knocked about, and I'd rather make sure that there is a good gap there. There has to be a gap between the bottom of the pickup here, the baffle and the pickup, and the sump, obviously, or the oil pan if you're American, because otherwise it can't get any oil through there. Some of these will have holes around the edge. I know on mine, when I built my engine, I left it about 3/4 inch off the bottom there, in the sort of absurd idea that hopefully if there was any muck in the bottom of the sump, it would settle to the bottom of the sump. I might be completely way off with that, but it seems to have worked so far. The only other problem with that is if you've too large a gap, it can pump that much oil to the top of the engine. It depends how your drain back is. If your oil drain back is quick and swift and accurate and effective, it's no big issue. But if it takes a long time, which sometimes on Rovers it can. I know Skyline engines, people talk about oil drain back issues. I never had it on mine. But either way, the head can fill up with oil and the sump is therefore empty. But yeah, they fit on there nice. There were some very light scratches, if you saw the earlier videos, in there from somebody again gouging the old gaskets off when they've done some work on the engine. It's very bad practice, but unfortunately we're kind of stuck with it. So you've just got to make sure, because obviously if it takes air in here, it won't pick oil up into the pump. So again, catastrophically bad. I'm just going to nip those down, just check that isn't moving a country mile there. It's moved a little, but that's fine, that'll pull down. You'll notice I'm tightening these two screws first, because I want a good seal here. I don't want it cockled back with the sort of steady nut. I'm just going to tighten those as tight as I dare. I'm not going FT with them. Work out what the F is in FT, but the T is tight. But I am tightening a little bit more than I would do with a 1/4 UNC normally. They have split locking washers on. They came off, they've gone back on. That looks pretty blooming good to me. So I'm just going to put the washer on there. Now this nut originally was a plain nut with a split locking washer. I've got a 5/16 UNF nylock nut there. Just going to bob that on there. Unfortunately I have to do that with a spanner. This will no doubt end up speeded up. I'm never actually sure if you're supposed to cut these off or not. I can only assume so. I've always done it and it's always worked. So. Same with the bits of gasket at the front, any sealer that's come through. Again, doing it towards myself, but away from my fingers and away from the engine, because I don't want any muck in there. Obviously my fingers won't grow back, but the engine won't put the aluminium back either if I damage it. So that's that. Just going to give that a very, very clean wipe. You'll find when you put oil on here, when the oil comes out of the engine and stuff, when you're doing the fitting, two things. One, it'll stop any gasket seals sticking to it, which sometimes can be a good thing, but two, little bits of muck stick to it as well. So if there's anything in the air, they will actually stick to it. Now I've had that bag over this all the time, but there's still bits of muck stuck to it, so I want to make sure we get those out. And what I'm going to do is try the sump on, because again, if it doesn't take oiling when I try to prime the oil system, I'd rather know now and deal with it now than later on. And that's that sat flush down and in place. It's quite close to the front there, but I suspect the back is a lot further away. It's about 3 mil of gap. I mean, this obviously this oil pickup pipe and sump oil pan, if you're American, came out of the engine that came out of the Stag. But quite honestly, although it looked like it had run and worked before because it was all plumbed in, I've no evidence of that. So, you know, as I say, better to be safe, I think, than sorry. So that'll go on there. There will be the thickness of the gasket, and it is a cork gasket on here. Yeah, that's all right. Oh, good there. About 3 mil. Right, so, off camera, I've adjusted the sump a little bit. The oil pan, I wanted a little more clearance, so now we've got about 5 mil at the front and about sort of 8 mil at the back. I had a look at it and it did look a little bit dinted up, and inside it there's a witness mark from where it's obviously been damaged. And as I say, I've never ever seen this car or engine run in a car, because I bought it to rebuild and I bought it for the parts attached to it. So I want to be sure that there isn't any damage to anything that's going to cause a problem when I start it. So next job, smear a seal around it again. Not too much again, don't get a load of it in the sump. Whoops. Now this gasket is symmetrical that way. You will notice also, by the way, these quarter UNC bolt holes here, these are for the windage tray. I thought I did have one of those actually. SD1s have a windage tray in them. I would suspect that this engine wouldn't fit it anyway, because the sump has been lowered there to run close to the crank. But that's what that row of bolts is for, or bolt holes is for. Typical cork gasket running away from me, so just line that up with the holes. If you're going to leave this in place to set, I remember when I built my RB26 in my Skyline, it gave you recommended times to allow sealants and things to set. Now, with this being a cork gaskets are weird. They shrink and grow and do all sorts of weird stuff. The moisture affects them, everything affects them, actually, truth be told. So what I tend to do is get the sump on before that it dries in the wrong place, basically. Because if it's shrunk a little or grown a little, you're going to need to adjust it. And it'll be fine. I do the rocker cover gaskets. If you've done rocker cover gaskets on a Stag, or cam cover gaskets, whatever you want to call them, they are an absolute living nightmare. They grow like mad or shrink like mad, again, depending on the quality or the make or how long they've been, sat in the workshop. So I'll take you over to my bench over here, which is my trailer. I do like it when the trailer's here and I can do this, because you can lay everything out, and it gives you loads of room for logistics. Now, I have scuffed the sump a little, but I could see, I'm hoping you can see that. There is a mark here, look, you can see a ring, where the oil pickup pipe has clattered against the bottom of the sump. Now that's why I got a little bit twitchy about it. So what I've done is just with a wooden block, I've just eased that out. You can see where it's pressed up a bit here. That's this piece where it's welded on. So I've just eased that out on 2 wooden blocks. Now it has scuffed it a little, but quite honestly, it's a lot easier to repaint the Sump oil pan than it is to worry about having a bad oil leak or a lack of oil pickup, because that would be a disaster. So that's that. Let's move in the gasket just slightly. Oh no, just going to move forward a little bit. That'll be fine. That's fine, that's fine. Right, I'm going to attempt to remove some of this silicone from my hands. Silicone doesn't dry instantly. It does take a few hours to go off properly actually, but it does sort of get a skin on it within a little while. So what I'm going to do next is dig the screws back out of the thinners. Again, been cleaning them all up. This cellulose thinner evaporates very, very quickly, so they'll be ready to rock and roll within seconds. Just dry my hands. Then we'll get copper slipping those bad lads in. Or bad girls. If anybody's ever seen This Is Spinal Tap, you'll remember that bit where he goes, it's sexist, and he says, what's wrong with being sexy? It's sexist. Oh, that always tickled me to death. But I'm not sexist. I don't like anybody, so, you know. I just hate everyone, so it doesn't matter what gender you're. I'm joking, obviously. So yeah, just put the 4 corners in first. Just locate the gasket to the holes. And then again, as before, don't screw any of them down tight until you've got them all in. Tiny bead of copper slip on there. Just good practice really, if you ever need to get it off again, and you know, it saves damage and stuff like that. I'm hoping I don't have to take it off again, but you never just do know. Each one of those in there. Oops. Now the gasket has shifted ever so slightly on this side. Something very bizarre there. But that's no biggie, we'll sort that in a second. So, to tighten this down, I do this in a series of tightenings like I do everything else. I think the torque level is about 5 foot-pounds, which, well, I don't think any torque wrench goes that low. But 5 foot-pounds is about how tight you can get with a spanner that long, you know, an 1/2-inch spanner, and just nip it. It's not a lot. So what I'm going to do with this, and you'll no doubt be going fast when I do this, I'm going to start in the middle and run them all down. Right, so I'm just going to zoom in a bit. That's the Sump oil pan tightened down. Now, if you look around here, before I wipe the silicone off, can you see how there's a consistent splurge of silicone all the way around, top and bottom? That's what I was aiming for. Okay, I haven't over-tightened it, that's just silicone. This is just the cork gasket here. Look, it's not squished out. But you can see a nice bead all the way around. I'm going to do that again. You can see a nice bead all the way around. Like a little teeny tiny silicone weld all the way around there. Now I'm going to wipe off the excess in a second. But I'm glad to see that, because that means I've got a good seat on both sides. If, for example, it's high, if it's bent out of shape and this corner's up, it won't splurge any silicone out when you tighten it. You've got to remember it's gone a little bit like that. All Sumps will. I mean, this one's been altered here, as you can see, but all Sumps will move a little bit, oil pans or whatever, when they're welded. unless they've been, you know, when they're welded in the factory where they're clamped down and blah, 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 or pressed out or whatever. This isn't a Millerton race sump, you know. And that will then move a little anyway. So, but when you tighten this corner down, it'll try and pull that corner up, and so on and so forth. So what I'll do now with that is I've just run it down with the ratchet, just gently, just to a nip. No further than that. It is not what I'd class as tight. And I will leave that now to go off for a few days. Let that silicone form its own gasket in there. And then I'll just tighten it down just a tiny bit further, probably with a quarter ratchet. And that will compress that rubber onto the cork, and it'll make a nice good seal, and it'll stop the bolts vibrating loose, obviously. But I'm going to wipe the silicone off. Now, if you've got a big bead of silicone like that, you can leave it till it dries and then just flick it off. It sort of rubberies off. But I'm just going to give it a wipe round with a rag, because that's technically how I like to do it. So I'll do that now, and then we'll move along. So, ladies and gents, that's that for today. The bottom end of the engine is now built. Okay, so the pistons are in, rods, bearings, main caps, big end caps. The sump is on, the front cover is on, barring that one bolt. I will need to order a new one. I can't find a second-hand one, so that's fine. One of them, as I say, one did break, and I was missing one, so that must be the one. Couldn't remember which it was, because there was some came with the other timing cover. If I can find one, I'll stick in. If I haven't got one, I'll order one. The engine is now fully done at the bottom end, apart from the rear main oil seal and the flex plate. The next job is to build up the cylinder heads. As you can see, I've been cleaning the cylinder heads out, and what I've done with that one is I've removed a valve spring, which is here. I'm going to clean those up. I'm going to clean the valves and grind them back in. They are actually very good for the age of this engine. These are the valve collets here. I'm going to give it a clean round where those go, and then those are ready to go back on. There's also a couple of threads here that I need to weld up and get out for the intake manifold, and I think there's one on the exhaust side as well. Yeah, there's one there. These have been soaking in paraffin to release all this nasty muck the muck, and I'll get some more motorcycle cleaner and clean those. The valves, tips and everything are in very good condition, but I won't go through all that with you. I'll just do it. There'll be videos out there of how to do that, and then we'll go through fitting those, and then at that point the engine's ready to go in the car. The carbs need a really good clean and a good going over, but I'll do those. I'll put those on once the bottom end of the engine is in the car, and it's just a little lighter, a little easier, a little more room, and a little more manoeuvrable to get it back in the car. So the next step after the heads are on will be to put the bell housing on, which is over there. The flex plate, obviously, once the rear main seal's in, and put all that on these gearbox, and Bob's your uncle. I have got the front pulley cleaning up. It's a little bit bent on the power steering side, so I'm just going to have to straighten that out a little bit and paint it. And that's ready to go on. Oh, and I'm going to paint the engine, obviously. This pointer is coming off. I don't think it's right. I don't actually know. I don't know what engine that's for. I've never seen one like that. If it's in the right place, it's in the right place. There is one on the other front cover, so that's fine. I'll use the SD1 one, because it's an SD1 front. Oh no, it's a P6 front pulley going back on it, so we'll use that. This is a P6 water pump. Obviously, it's a lot shorter, more compact, fits better in anything because it gives you more room, unless you've got an SD1, in which case you want the original. You can see I've cleaned the silicone off around the edges a bit more here. I've just noticed that I've missed. Please forgive me. But I will sign off at this point and get that wiped away. Horrible stuff. I hate silicone. And that's that. It's all going well up to press. So if you've enjoyed the video, please consider liking it. If you want to carry on watching, please consider subscribing. I've lots of other videos on building stuff, welding stuff, doing all sorts of stuff really. So yeah, cool. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.